Hey, sleepers! Tonight we're going on a little trip. A quiet journey to a place of silent, gray dust under a black, star-dusted sky. We're traveling back to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where the treasures of the moon are kept under lock and key. It's a warm summer night. The air is still. The cicadas are humming their gentle, sleepy song outside. Inside, the long, empty hallways are cool and silent, filled only with the soft hum of electricity and the faint, lingering scent of discovery. It's a place where dreams of spaceflight live and breathe. But tonight, a different kind of dream is unfolding, one that will ripple through the halls of NASA and out into the world. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps our little corner of the universe grow. And as you settle in, we love to see where everyone is listening from. Let us know your city or country and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's a wonderful way to feel connected, all of us listening together under the same moon. So, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and get ready to drift off as we explore the strange, quiet, and cosmic story of the stolen moon rocks. The story begins not with a bang, but with a quiet ambition, a burning desire in the heart of a young man named Thad Roberts. Picture him now. He is 25 years old, a student at the University of Utah, studying physics and geology. But he is not just any student. He is a cooperative education student at NASA, a co-op. This means he gets to walk the same hallways as astronauts. He gets to work in the very buildings where the science of the cosmos is unraveled. For someone like Thad, this was more than a job. It was a calling. He was brilliant. Everyone who knew him said so. He had a quick mind, an easy charm, and a dream so big it could fill the sky. He wanted to be an astronaut. He wanted to walk on the moon himself one day. It was a dream he had nurtured since he was a small boy, looking up at that bright, distant orb. He had a background in geology, which made him a natural fit for the work he was doing. He understood rocks. He understood the stories they told. He knew that a simple gray stone could be a history book, holding secrets of incredible violence and silent, ancient beauty. He was on the inside, a place thousands of people would give anything to be. He was trusted. He had a key card. He had access to a world of wonders. And in that world, he felt a powerful sense of belonging, but also, perhaps, a sense of entitlement, a feeling that these cosmic treasures were part of his destiny, one way or another. He was not alone in this adventure. Dreams, especially dangerous ones, often need company. In the same building, Building 31 at the Johnson Space Center, worked another intern. Her name was Tiffany Fowler. She was 22 years old, and she was Thad's girlfriend. She was drawn to his energy, his intelligence, his grand, sweeping plans for the future. They shared a sense of adventure, a feeling that they were special, destined for something more than a normal life. Their romance was woven into the very fabric of NASA, their dates taking place under the watchful eyes of giant rocket displays and models of lunar landers. And there were others, drawn into Thad's orbit like small moons around a planet. Shay Saur, another intern, a friend who was swept up in the excitement. And Gordon McWhorter, a fellow student who would play a small but crucial role from a distance. Together, they formed a small, tight-knit group of young, brilliant people, standing at the threshold of their lives, with the universe, it seemed, at their fingertips. They were part of a program designed to nurture the next generation of scientists and explorers. They were given a chance to touch the future. But for Thad Roberts, touching wasn't enough. He wanted to possess it. He wanted to hold a piece of the sky in his own hands. And he began to formulate a plan, a quiet, audacious plan to do just that. It was a plan that started as a whisper, a what-if shared between lovers, that slowly grew into a concrete and deeply misguided reality. The stage was set, not for a violent smash and grab, but for a quiet, deliberate act of theft born from a strange mix of love, ambition, and a profound misunderstanding of the true value of the treasures he sought. The weekend of July 13th, 2002, was quiet at the Johnson Space Center. The Texas summer heat hung heavy in the air. Most of the scientists and staff were at home, enjoying their time off. The sprawling campus was nearly deserted, a ghost town of scientific achievement. The silence was deep, punctuated only by the hum of machinery and the chirping of insects in the manicured lawns outside. This was the moment Thad Roberts had been waiting for. This was the window of opportunity. Imagine him now, walking through the empty parking lot with Tiffany Fowler and Shay Soar. The air is warm and humid on their skin. There's a nervous energy between them, a mix of fear and exhilaration. It probably felt like a movie, like they were the stars of their own secret mission. Thad, with his NASA-issued key card, was their key to the kingdom. He swiped the card at the entrance to Building 31. The lock clicked open with a soft electronic whir. There were no alarms, no flashing lights. Just a simple, permissive click. They were inside. Building 31 was not just any office building. It was a sacred place in the world of space science. It housed the Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Directorate, a fancy name for the place where NASA keeps its rocks from space. Not just any rocks, but the most precious, most sought-after materials on Earth. Inside this building was the legendary Lunar Sample Laboratory facility, a high-tech vault where the majority of the Apollo moon rocks were kept in pristine conditions. But Thad wasn't aiming for the main vault. That was far too secure. He knew of a softer target. He was targeting the personal lab of a scientist named Dr. Everett Gibson. Dr. Gibson was a renowned geochemist, a veteran of the Apollo program. He was one of the original scientists who had analyzed the very first samples brought back from the moon. His lab was his sanctuary, filled with decades of research. And in his lab, he kept a safe, a very, very large safe. It was a gray, formidable-looking steel box weighing 600 pounds. Think about that for a moment. 600 pounds. That's the weight of a large motorcycle, or 3 grown men. It wasn't something you could just tuck under your arm and walk away with. Inside this safe, Dr. Gibson kept samples he used for research and for educational outreach. He would take them to schools and universities to inspire the next generation, just as Thad and his friends were supposed to be. It was a working collection, handled with care, but more accessible than the deep storage samples in the main vault. Thad knew this. He had worked in the building. He had seen the comings and goings. He knew Dr. Gibson was away on vacation. The 3 interns made their way through the silent, dimly lit corridors to Dr. Gibson's lab. The door was locked, but it was a simple lock. It didn't take long for them to bypass it. And there it was, the safe. It sat there, a silent, heavy guardian of cosmic history. Getting it out of the building was the real challenge. They used a dolly, a small wheeled platform, to begin the arduous task of moving the 600-pound behemoth. You can imagine the scene. the scraping sound of steel on the floor echoing in the empty building, the muffled grunts of exertion, the whispered instructions. Every sound must have seemed amplified, every shadow a potential witness. They maneuvered the safe out of the lab, down the hallway, and into an elevator. They took it down to the ground floor and out into the humid Texas night. They loaded it into Thad's vehicle, a Jeep Grand Cherokee. The suspension must have groaned under the immense weight. And then, just like that, they drove away. No alarms had sounded. No security guards had appeared. They had walked into one of NASA's most important buildings and walked out with a 600-pound safe full of priceless treasures. The heist itself was over. It had been quiet, methodical, and shockingly simple. But the most reckless part of their journey was just beginning. So, what exactly was inside that 600-pound steel box? What cosmic treasures did Thad Roberts and his accomplices steal from Dr. Gibson's lab? It wasn't just a handful of pebbles. It was a collection of immense scientific and historical importance. The contents of that safe represented a lifetime of work and a legacy that stretched back to the very dawn of the space age. Let's start with the moon rocks themselves. Inside the safe were samples from nearly every successful Apollo mission that landed on the moon. There were pieces of Apollo 11, the very first mission where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took those historic steps. Imagine holding a piece of the ground that humanity first touched on another world. There were samples from Apollo 12, 15, 16, and 17. Each mission landed in a different location, a different geological region of the moon. So each sample was unique, telling a different chapter of the moon's 4.5 billion year history. In total, the lunar material weighed approximately 101.5 grams. That might not sound like much. It's about the weight of a small bar of soap or a deck of cards. But in the world of lunar science, it was a fortune. To understand its value, you have to think about the cost of getting it. NASA brought back a total of 842 pounds of moon rock across all the Apollo missions. The total cost of the Apollo program, adjusted for today's money, runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars. When you do the math, the cost to collect just 1 gram of this material is estimated to be over $50,000. So the 101.5 grams in that safe had a collection cost of over $5 million. But their real value wasn't in dollars. It was in the information they held. The samples were varied. There was lunar soil, what scientists call regolith. This is the fine gray dust that covers the moon's surface. It's created by billions of years of meteorite impacts, big and small, grinding the surface rock into powder. It's full of tiny glass beads, formed by the heat of those impacts. There were also larger rock fragments. Some were basalts, which are dark, volcanic rocks. They tell the story of the moon's ancient, fiery past, when lava flowed across its surface, creating the dark patches we see as the seas on the moon. Other samples were breccias. A breccia is a wonderful kind of rock. Imagine taking a bunch of different rocks, breaking them into sharp, angular pieces, and then cementing them all together into a new rock. That's a breccia. Lunar breccias are like cosmic history collages. They can contain fragments of many different rock types from many different places, all fused together by the immense pressure of a meteorite impact. Studying them is like reading a jumbled, but fascinating, diary of the moon. But the safe contained more than just pieces of the moon. There were also 32 priceless meteorite samples. Meteorites are rocks that have fallen to Earth from space. Most come from the asteroid belt, but some are even more exotic. Inside Dr. Gibson's safe was a piece of the famous Martian meteorite, a Lichiro-01. This is a rock that was blasted off the surface of Mars by an asteroid impact millions of years ago. It wandered through space before landing in Antarctica on Earth about 13,000 years ago. In the 1990s, some scientists, including Dr. Gibson himself, announced that they had found what looked like fossilized microscopic life inside this very meteorite. While that claim remains highly debated, it made a Lichit 400 one of the most famous and scientifically important rocks on the planet. And Thad Roberts had just stolen a piece of it. Perhaps the most heartbreaking loss for Dr. Gibson was not the rocks themselves, but the papers that were with them. The safe also held his research notebooks, decades of handwritten notes, observations, data, and ideas. These documents chronicled his entire career, his intellectual journey with these samples. They contained insights and details that were, in their own way, just as irreplaceable as the rocks. They were the human story behind the science. The rocks could, in theory, be replaced by other samples from the vault. But the notebooks, the product of a brilliant mind working for 30 years, were gone forever. The theft was not just a loss of material, but a loss of knowledge, a tear in the fabric of scientific history. To truly grasp the gravity of this theft, we need to zoom out a little. Let's drift away from that humid night in Houston and look at the bigger picture. Let's talk about the Apollo moon rocks as a collection. They are not just rocks. They are a symbol of one of humanity's greatest achievements. They are a national treasure, and indeed, a treasure for the entire world. Between 1969 and 1972, 6 Apollo missions landed on the moon. The astronauts of Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 were not just pilots and explorers. They were also geological field workers. They were trained to identify and collect interesting and diverse samples of the lunar surface. In total, they brought back an astonishing 842 pounds, or 382 kilograms, of lunar material. This collection is the crown jewel of planetary science. Imagine the effort involved. It took the work of over 400,000 people, from engineers and scientists to seamstresses who hand-stitched the spacesuits, to make the Apollo program a reality. It cost billions upon billions of dollars. All of this, in part, was to bring back these precious samples. This is why we can talk about a collection cost of over $50,000 per gram. It's a way of trying to put a number on that monumental effort. But scientifically and culturally, the samples are considered priceless. You cannot buy them. NASA does not sell them. Legally, they belong to the United States government, held in trust for the scientific community and for all of humanity. So, where are all these rocks kept? Most of them, the vast majority, are stored in a special facility at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. It's called the Lunar Sample Laboratory Facility. This is the main vault we mentioned earlier. It is one of the cleanest, most secure places on Earth. Picture a laboratory from a science fiction movie. The air is filtered to be cleaner than in a hospital operating room. The rocks themselves are not kept out in the open air. They are stored inside sealed cabinets filled with pure nitrogen gas. Why nitrogen? Because it's an inert gas. It doesn't react with other things. The Earth's atmosphere, with its oxygen and water vapor, would contaminate the moon rocks. It would cause them to rust and change their chemical makeup, over billions of years of sitting in the vacuum of space. The moon has no atmosphere to protect it, so its rocks are in a very pure, unweathered state. To study them properly, scientists need to keep them that way. It's like keeping a very, very old book in a special case to stop its pages from crumbling. Scientists from all over the world can request tiny samples of these rocks for their research. They have to write detailed proposals explaining what they want to study and why it's important. A special committee reviews these proposals and decides who gets a sample. When a sample is approved, it's carefully prepared in the lab by technicians wearing sterile suits. They work inside glove boxes, sticking their hands into sealed gloves built into the nitrogen cabinets to handle the rocks. It's a slow, meticulous process. Every speck of dust is precious. This is the world that Thad Roberts had access to. While he didn't break into the main vault, the samples he stole from Dr. Gibson's office were part of this same sacred collection. They were on loan, so to speak, for research and education. The security around these loaned samples was, as the heist revealed, far less stringent. It was based on a culture of trust. It was assumed that the scientists and interns working with these materials understood their immense value and would protect them as if they were their own. It was a community where everyone shared the same awe and reverence for these pieces of another world. Or so they thought. The theft shattered that sense of trust. It showed that even in the heart of NASA, among people who dreamed of the stars, a treasure so immense could be vulnerable to very earthly desires. After successfully stealing the 600-pound safe, Thad Roberts and his accomplices had a new problem. A very heavy, very conspicuous problem. They drove the safe to a motel room. There, they managed to pry it open. The story goes that they used simple tools, like a crowbar and a sledgehammer. Inside, they found their prize. Trays of lunar soil, small rocks, meteorites, and Dr. Gibson's precious notebooks. They had the treasure. Now, they needed to turn it into cash. Thad's plan was audacious, and in hindsight, incredibly naive. He believed he could find a buyer on the open market. He turned to the internet. He found a website called mineralogy.com, a forum for amateur and professional rock collectors. It was a place where people traded interesting geological finds. Thad, using a fake name, crafted an advertisement. He wrote, "Priceless moon rocks now available." He claimed he had lunar material for sale and that he could get more. He set a high price, hoping to attract wealthy and discreet collectors. He was fishing in a very small, very specialized pond. His advertisement did not go unnoticed. It caught the eye of a man named Axel Emmerman. Axel was a Belgian mineral collector, a passionate hobbyist who loved rocks and minerals. He was exactly the kind of person Thad was hoping to attract. Thad sent him an email offering to sell him a 1-gram moon rock for a price between $100,000 and $1 million. But Axel Emmerman was no fool. He knew something was very wrong. He knew that it is illegal to privately own or sell Apollo moon rocks. Anyone claiming to have them for sale was either a scammer selling fakes, or they were a thief. The offer was too good and too illegal to be true. Instead of getting excited about the offer, Axel got suspicious. He did the right thing. He contacted the FBI. He forwarded them the emails from the mysterious seller. The FBI immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. NASA had already realized the safe was missing, and a major investigation was underway. Axel's email was the break they needed. The game was afoot. The FBI decided to set up a sting operation. They needed to lure the sellers into a trap. An undercover FBI agent created a persona. He called himself Orb Robinson. It's a wonderfully spacey, almost comical name for an undercover identity in a moon rock case. Agent Robinson posed as a wealthy, eccentric buyer, the kind of person who might plausibly want to buy a piece of the moon on the black market. He began communicating with Thad. Thad, believing he had found a serious buyer, was thrilled. He and Orb Robinson negotiated the terms of the sale. They exchanged emails and phone calls. Thad even sent Orb Robinson a small sample of the stolen material as proof. He sent a few specks of lunar dust and a tiny chip of a Martian meteorite taped to a piece of paper. When the FBI received this package, they immediately sent it to NASA for verification. The experts at the Johnson Space Center confirmed their worst fears. The samples were authentic. They were from the stolen collection. Now that they had proof, the FBI arranged a meeting to finalize the deal. They would meet in Orlando, Florida. Why Orlando? Perhaps because it was a neutral location, far from Houston. Or perhaps because it was a place associated with fantasy and adventure, a fitting backdrop for this strange story. They agreed to meet at an Italian restaurant called Tony Roma's on July 20th, 2002. The date is significant. July 20th is the anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. It was the very day, 33 years earlier, that Neil Armstrong had first set foot on the lunar surface. Thad Roberts, in his grand, misguided sense of destiny, likely chose this date deliberately. He was about to complete his own lunar mission, selling the very ground that Armstrong had walked on. He, Tiffany, and Shay drove to Florida, carrying their precious and illicit cargo, ready to meet their buyer and collect their fortune. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. The scene at the Italian restaurant in Orlando must have been surreal. Thad Roberts, Tiffany Fowler, and Shay Soar arrived to their meeting with the mysterious Orb Robinson. They were young, full of nervous excitement, on the verge of what they believed would be a multi-million-dollar payday. They brought the goods with them. They had the moon rocks, the Martian meteorites, all carefully packaged, ready for the exchange. The restaurant was likely bustling with families and tourists, enjoying their meals, completely unaware of the cosmic drama about to unfold at one of the tables. The undercover FBI agent, playing the part of Orb Robinson, met them as planned. The conversation probably started with pleasantries, a careful dance of negotiation. Thad would have presented the samples, perhaps with a flourish, explaining their origin and their immense value. He was a good talker, charismatic and confident. For a few moments, it must have seemed like his audacious plan was a complete success. But the FBI was watching. The restaurant was surrounded by agents. Once they saw the stolen goods and had enough evidence of the intent to sell, they moved in. The arrest was swift and quiet. There was no shootout, no dramatic chase through the kitchen. FBI agents simply approached the table, identified themselves, and placed the three young interns under arrest. The dream of $1 million heist dissolved in an instant, replaced by the stark reality of handcuffs and federal charges. Thad, Tiffany, and Shay were taken into custody. The recovery of the stolen materials was the FBI's top priority. Most of the lunar and meteorite samples were recovered right there in Orlando. But the story took another, truly bizarre turn when the FBI searched the motel room where Thad and Tiffany had been staying. There, investigators found more of the stolen material, but it was not stored in a protective case. Thad Roberts had taken some of the priceless lunar dust and sprinkled it on the bed. He and Tiffany Fowler then had sex on top of the moon dust. When questioned about this later, Thad reportedly claimed that he wanted to be able to say he owned the moon, and that he and Tiffany were the first people to have sex on the moon. This act, more than anything else, reveals the strange mix of arrogance, romanticism, and scientific ignorance at the heart of the crime. For a scientist, this was the ultimate desecration. These samples had been kept in pristine, sterile conditions for 30 years. They were a pure, untouched record of another world. By exposing them to the air, to the fibers of a motel bedsheet, and to human contact, Thad and Tiffany had contaminated them. They had irrevocably damaged their scientific value. While the rocks could still be analyzed, they would forever carry the trace of their brief, strange journey to a motel room in Florida. It was a misguided attempt to create a personal, romantic myth, but it came at a great cost to science. While the main trio was being arrested in Orlando, the fourth member of the group, Gordon McWhorter, was back in Houston. He had acted as a middleman, helping to connect Thad with potential buyers. When he learned of the arrests, he quickly realized the trouble he was in. He decided to cooperate with the authorities. He was arrested separately, but his cooperation would later earn him a much lighter sentence than the others. The heist was over. The priceless rocks were, for the most part, back in safe hands, but they were changed. They now carried a new story, a strange and sorry chapter in their long cosmic history. And the young people who had dreamed of touching the stars were now facing the very down-to-earth consequences of their actions. The scandal of the stolen moon rocks was no longer a secret. It was about to become a major news story, sending shockwaves through NASA and the public alike. With the arrests made and the moon rocks recovered, the legal system took over. The four young people involved in the heist now had to face the consequences of their actions. The charges were serious. They weren't just accused of a simple theft. They had stolen government property of immense and irreplaceable value. The case was handled in federal court. Thad Roberts, as the clear ringleader and architect of the plan, faced the most severe charges. He was charged with theft of government property and the interstate transportation of stolen goods. The second charge was because he had transported the stolen safe and its contents from Texas to Florida. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, the emails, the sting operation, the testimony of his accomplices, he chose to plead guilty. This was likely a strategic move to avoid a longer sentence that a trial might bring. The judge in the case had to weigh the severity of the crime against Thad's youth and his previously clean record. The crime was unprecedented. How do you sentence someone for stealing the moon? The judge ultimately sentenced Thad Roberts to serve 100 months in federal prison. That is 8 years and 4 months. It was a significant sentence, a clear message that such a crime would not be taken lightly. Thad would end up serving about 7.5 years of that sentence before being released. Tiffany Fowler, Thad's girlfriend and active participant in the heist, also faced serious consequences. Her involvement was direct. She was there when the safe was stolen. She traveled to Orlando for the sale. She, too, pleaded guilty. Her sentence, however, was much lighter than Thad's. The court likely saw her as being under Thad's influence. She received 180 days of incarceration, which is about 6 months, followed by 3 years of probation. It was a punishment that acknowledged her role, but also her lesser culpability compared to Thad. Shay Saar, the third intern who was present at the theft and the arrest in Orlando, received a similar sentence to Tiffany. She also got 180 days of incarceration and 3 years of probation. The court treated them as partners in the crime, but not the masterminds. The fourth individual, Gordon McWhorter, received the most lenient sentence of all. He had not been directly involved in the physical theft or the attempted sale in Orlando. His role was as a facilitator, trying to help find a buyer. Crucially, he had cooperated with the FBI once he realized the plot was unraveling. In the legal system, cooperation is often rewarded. For his role and his assistance to the investigation, Gordon McWhorter was sentenced to probation only. He avoided any jail time. The sentences reflected the different levels of involvement and responsibility in the crime. Thad Roberts, the dreamer who wanted to own the moon, paid the highest price. His ambition had led him to a federal prison cell. The others, who were swept up in his plan, also saw their lives profoundly altered, their promising futures at NASA cut short. The legal chapter of the story was closed, but the repercussions for NASA were just beginning. The case had been a major embarrassment, and it had exposed some deeply troubling weaknesses in the agency's own security. The theft of the moon rocks was more than just a crime committed by a few misguided interns. It was a wake-up call for NASA. It was a scandal that exposed shocking and embarrassing lapses in the security protocols meant to protect the nation's most precious scientific assets. How could a 600-pound safe be wheeled out of a supposedly secure building without anyone noticing? The investigation that followed the arrests revealed a system that was based more on trust and tradition than on rigorous security. The primary point of failure was the security at Building 31 itself. Access to the building was controlled by a simple card key system. Employees and authorized interns like Thad Roberts were issued a card that they could swipe to unlock the doors. This is a common security measure in many office buildings. However, for a building that housed materials valued in the millions, if not billions of dollars, it was woefully inadequate. There were no additional layers of security. There was no security guard stationed at the entrance, no secondary biometric scan like a fingerprint or an iris scan, no mandatory sign-in and sign-out log for after-hours access. Thad's key card was his all-access pass, and there was no system to flag his unusual weekend entry as suspicious. Even more troubling was the lack of any real-time inventory system for the samples. The lunar rocks and meteorites were cataloged, of course, but the system was largely paper-based and not centrally tracked in a way that would immediately show if something was missing. The samples in Dr. Gibson's safe were essentially on a long-term loan to him from the main vault. There was no procedure that required him to periodically verify that the samples were still there. In fact, NASA only discovered the theft when Dr. Gibson returned from his vacation and found his lab disturbed and his safe gone. If he had been on a longer trip, the thieves might have had weeks or even months to sell the materials before anyone at NASA even knew they were missing. It was a system that relied on people noticing something was wrong, rather than a system that would automatically alert them. Think of it like a library. The main vault was like the rare books room, with a special librarian who watches over it constantly. But Dr. Gibson's lab was like a professor's office, filled with books checked out from that library. The library trusted the professor to keep them safe, but they didn't go to his office every day to count them. Thad Roberts simply walked into the professor's office while he was away and took the books. The incident forced NASA to conduct a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of its security procedures for all astromaterials. The internal investigation concluded that the agency had become complacent. The culture of trust, which was a positive thing in many ways, had created blind spots in their security. They had spent billions of dollars to get the rocks and built a state-of-the-art vault to protect the main collection, but had neglected the in-between spaces where samples were actively being used for research. The scandal was a harsh lesson. It showed that the threat to these materials didn't just come from sophisticated international criminals, but could also come from the inside, from trusted individuals who were given access and opportunity. The agency knew it had to make significant changes to ensure that a scandal like this could never, ever happen again. The quiet, easy access that Thad Roberts exploited was about to be replaced by a much more rigorous and technologically advanced system of protection. While the 2002 heist was shocking in its audacity, it was not the first time that moon rocks had vanished. The story of Thad Roberts revealed a fascinating and little-known global problem: the case of the missing Goodwill moon rocks. This broader context shows that the desire to possess a piece of the moon is a powerful temptation, and that security and oversight have often been lacking, not just at NASA, but around the world. After the historic Apollo 11 mission in 1969, President Richard Nixon decided to use the moon rocks as a tool of diplomacy. It was a gesture of global unity. The mission, he argued, was accomplished on behalf of all mankind. To symbolize this, the United States government created special commemorative plaques. Each plaque contained 4 tiny rice grain-sized specks of genuine Apollo 11 moon dust, totaling about 50 milligrams. These plaques were encased in a clear acrylic button and mounted on a handsome wooden display stand, alongside a small flag of the recipient nation that had also been flown to the moon. These Goodwill moon rocks were presented as official gifts to 135 foreign countries and the 50 U.S. states. The gesture was repeated after the final lunar mission, Apollo 17, in 1972. These gifts were even more substantial. Each one contained a 1.14-gram piece of lunar rock, a sample of basalt collected by astronauts Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt. This rock, sample number 70,017, was nicknamed the Goodwill Rock. Again, these were mounted on plaques with the nation's flag that had flown on the mission, and were distributed to the same countries and states. It was a beautiful idea. But the problem was, once these priceless artifacts left the custody of the U.S. government, there was no system in place to track them. They were handed over to heads of state, to kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers. After that, what happened to them was often a mystery. Many were placed in national museums, where they were treasured and proudly displayed, but many others were not. They fell victim to theft, to war, to political upheaval, or simply to neglect. Over the years, investigative journalists and dedicated private citizens began to notice that many of these Goodwill rocks were missing. One of the most prominent figures in this search is a man named Joseph Guffins. He is a former senior special agent for NASA's Office of Inspector General. After he left NASA, he began a project with his university students, which they called Operation Lunar Eclipse. Their mission was to try to track down all 270 of the Goodwill moon rocks distributed by the Nixon administration. What they found was startling. They estimated that over 180 of these official gifts were unaccounted for, lost, stolen, or hidden away in private collections. The stories are like miniature spy thrillers. The moon rock given to Honduras, for example, was stolen from the presidential palace and later recovered in a sting operation when a man tried to sell it to an undercover agent for $5 million. The rock given to Malta was stolen from their National Museum in 2004 and has never been seen again. The sample given to Romania vanished during the chaos of the 1989 revolution that overthrew the dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. The one given to Ireland was destroyed in a fire at the Dublin Observatory, where it was stored. This creates a shadowy black market. Because it is illegal to own Apollo rocks, any that appear for sale are immediately suspect. But the Goodwill rocks create a gray area. A country could, in theory, decide to sell its official gift, though none have ever officially done so. This ambiguity, combined with the number of missing samples, fuels a market for fakes and for the few genuine rocks that have fallen into private hands. The Thad Roberts case was different because he stole directly from NASA, but it shone a bright light on this existing black market. It showed that there was indeed an appetite among some wealthy collectors for these forbidden fruits of the cosmos. The scandal wasn't just about a security failure at NASA. It was a dramatic chapter in the much larger, stranger story of humanity's struggle to be a worthy caretaker of its celestial treasures. Let's take a moment to explore this idea of the Goodwill Moon rocks a little more deeply, because it's a story of generosity, politics, and human nature. When President Nixon initiated this program, the world was in the midst of the Cold War. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was a fierce competition for technological and ideological supremacy. The Apollo 11 moon landing was a decisive victory for the U.S. in that race. But Nixon and his advisors were smart. They understood that gloating would be poor diplomacy. Instead, they framed the achievement as a universal one. The famous plaque left on the moon by the Apollo 11 astronauts reads, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD we came in peace for all mankind." The Goodwill Moon Rock program was the tangible expression of that message. It was a way of sharing the triumph. Let's picture one of these gifts. The Apollo 11 plaque was a beautiful object. A small wooden stand with the plaque mounted on it. In the center, a clear lucite button, and inside that button, suspended like tiny gray stars, were the 4 specks of lunar dust. Below it, a message of peace. Imagine being a leader of a small, developing nation in 1969, a country perhaps struggling with poverty or political instability. And an emissary from the most powerful nation on Earth arrives and presents you with this, a piece of the moon. It must have felt like a gift from the heavens themselves, a symbol of hope and of being included in a great human adventure. The Apollo 17 gifts, given out in 1973, were even more impressive. The rock was much larger. A single piece you could actually see clearly, not just dust specks. And each one came with the flag of the recipient nation that had been carried all the way to the moon and back by the astronauts. Think about that. The flag of your country leaving the Earth, traveling through the vacuum of space, orbiting the moon, and then returning to be mounted next to a piece of that moon. It was an incredibly powerful and personal gesture. The problem, as we've seen, was the follow-up. There was none. The gifts were given, and that was the end of the U.S. government's involvement. In many countries, the rocks were passed down from one leader to the next. Sometimes, a departing dictator or president would take the rock with them, viewing it as a personal gift rather than a gift to nation. This is believed to have happened in several countries. In other cases, the rock was simply forgotten, stored away in a dusty government vault or a palace basement, its significance lost to a new generation of bureaucrats. This is where the work of people like Joseph Gothams, the moon rock detective, becomes so important. His Operation Lunar Eclipse project was a painstaking piece of historical and journalistic detective work. He and his students would write letters to national museums, contact government officials, and search through archives and news reports. They were piecing together a puzzle scattered across the globe. Their work led to some amazing discoveries and recoveries. The story of the Cyprus moon rock is a good example. The rock was given to the nation of Cyprus, but after the 1974 invasion and division of the island, the rock disappeared. It was believed to have been lost forever. But through the goodwill of a diplomat's son, it was eventually located and returned to the people of Cyprus, becoming a symbol of hope for reunification. The value of these goodwill rocks on the black market is immense, which is why so many have been targeted by thieves. The rock stolen from Honduras was offered for $5 million. The rock recovered from a cellar in Colorado, originally gifted to the state, was valued in the millions. These objects are small, hoardable, and incredibly valuable, making them a tempting target. The story of the Goodwill moon rocks is a perfect illustration of how a grand, idealistic gesture can be complicated by the messiness of human affairs. It's a story about the difficulty of stewardship. It's one thing to achieve something great, like going to the moon. It's another thing entirely to properly care for the legacy of that achievement. The theft by Thad Roberts was a crime born of individual greed and ambition, but it fits into this larger pattern of our species struggling, and sometimes failing, to protect the treasures we hold in common. So, what is a moon rock actually worth? It's a simple question with a very complicated answer. We have to think about value in two different ways. The monetary value, the price tag you could put on it, and the scientific value, which is, for many, impossible to calculate. Let's start with the money. As we've learned, it is illegal to buy or sell the Apollo moon rocks. NASA considers them national treasures, not commodities. So there is no legal market, which makes pricing them tricky. The values we hear about come from a few different places: the black market, the cost of collection, and the legal sale of other types of moon rocks. On the black market, the price is whatever a wealthy, secretive buyer is willing to pay. Experts and law enforcement officials who have investigated these cases have thrown out some staggering numbers. Estimates for the street value of a gram of Apollo moon rock range from $1 million to $5 million, and sometimes even higher. When Thad Roberts was trying to sell his stolen goods, he was hoping for a multi-million-dollar deal. The man who tried to sell the stolen Honduran Goodwill rock asked for $5 million. These are prices driven by rarity, illegality, and the ultimate bragging rights of owning something that almost no one else can have. Then there's the collection cost we talked about earlier. By dividing the total cost of the Apollo program by the amount of rock brought back, you get a figure of around $50,000 per gram. This isn't the market price, but it's a way of quantifying the incredible effort and resources required to obtain the material. But there is one way that lunar material has been sold legally, and that gives us a real-world benchmark. The Soviet Union, during their unmanned lunar missions in the 1970s, also brought back small samples of moon rock. They used robotic probes to drill into the surface and return tiny cores of lunar soil. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a few of these samples were declassified and sold at auction by Sotheby's. In 1993, 3 tiny specks of rock from the Luna 16 mission, weighing just 0.2 grams, sold for $442,500. More recently, in 2018, a larger collection of Luna 16 samples sold for nearly $855,000. These auctions show that there is a real, legal market for lunar material, and the prices are astronomical. Now, let's set aside the money and talk about the real value, the scientific value. To a planetary scientist, a moon rock is a time capsule. It is a piece of the early solar system, preserved in the vacuum of space for billions of years. The Earth is a geologically active planet. We have wind, rain, oceans, and plate tectonics. These forces constantly erode, recycle, and destroy old rocks. The oldest rocks ever found on Earth are about 4 billion years old, and they are incredibly rare. The surface of our planet is constantly getting a facelift. The moon, on the other hand, is geologically quiet. It has no atmosphere, no oceans, no plate tectonics. Its surface has been sitting there, largely unchanged, for billions of years, exposed only to the vacuum of space, the solar wind, and the constant rain of meteorites. So, the rocks on the moon's surface are ancient. They preserve a record of the solar system's childhood, a history that has been almost completely erased here on Earth. By studying these rocks, scientists can answer some of the biggest questions we have. How did the moon form? The leading theory, which was largely confirmed by studying the Apollo samples, is that a Mars-sized object crashed into the early Earth, and the debris from that colossal impact eventually coalesced to form the moon. The chemistry of the moon rocks supports this idea. Scientists can also learn about the history of the sun by looking at particles from the solar wind that are embedded in the lunar soil. They can learn about the history of meteorite impacts in our part of the solar system by dating the craters and the melted glass in the rocks. This helps us understand the risks we might face on Earth. And the discoveries keep coming. Even now, 50 years after they were collected, scientists are still studying the Apollo samples and finding new things. We have developed new analytical techniques, new instruments that are far more sensitive than what was available in the 1970s. Scientists can now study a sample that is smaller than a grain of sand and learn incredible details about its chemistry and history. Some of the Apollo samples were deliberately kept in sealed containers, unopened, saved for future generations of scientists with better tools. The scientific value of these rocks is not static. It continues to grow as our own technology evolves. They are, quite simply, a gift that keeps on giving. So, when Thad Roberts contaminated those samples, he wasn't just damaging a valuable object. He was muddying the pages of one of the oldest and most important history books in existence. After the profound embarrassment and the harsh lessons of the 2002 heist, NASA knew that significant changes were essential. The agency could not afford another breach of this magnitude. The security review that followed the incident led to a complete overhaul of how all extraterrestrial materials were handled and protected, not just at the Johnson Space Center, but across all of NASA's facilities. The age of trust, while noble, was over. It was replaced by an age of verification and multi-layered security. The first and most obvious change was to the physical security of the buildings themselves. The simple card key access that Thad Roberts exploited was no longer considered sufficient for any area housing valuable samples. NASA began implementing multi-factor authentication systems. This is a concept we are all familiar with now in our digital lives. It means you need more than one thing to prove who you are. So instead of just a key card, a person might need a key card and a PIN number, or a key card and a biometric scan, like a fingerprint or a palm scan. For the most sensitive areas, like the main lunar sample facility, these systems became standard. The goal was to create layers of security, like the layers of an onion, so that compromising one layer would not grant full access. Another critical improvement was the creation of a detailed, centralized, and digital inventory tracking system. The old system, which was partly on paper and fragmented between different labs and departments, was retired. The new system is a comprehensive database that tracks every single sample, no matter how small. Each sample is given a unique barcode. When a sample is moved, even from one cabinet to another within the same lab, it is scanned. When a researcher checks out a sample for study, it is scanned out. When it is returned, it is scanned back in. This creates a complete, real-time digital chain of custody. If a sample were to go missing, the system would flag it almost immediately, not weeks later when a scientist returns from vacation. It's like a modern warehouse or a high-end jewelry store, where the location of every single item is known at all times. Access for non-permanent staff, like interns and co-op students, was also severely restricted. While these programs are incredibly valuable for training the next generation, the Thad Roberts case proved that they also carried risks. New protocols were put in place to limit intern and student access to the most high-value materials. Students could still work in the labs and be part of the science, but they would be under much closer supervision, and they would no longer have the kind of unsupervised after-hours access that Thad Roberts enjoyed. Furthermore, NASA enhanced its personnel screening processes. Background checks for employees and interns with access to sensitive materials became more thorough. The agency also considered adding psychological evaluations to the screening process. The goal was to identify any potential red flags, any personality traits or personal circumstances that might make an individual a security risk. This was not about assuming everyone was a potential thief, but about recognizing that the temptation posed by these materials was unique, and it required a more careful assessment of the people who would be working with them. In essence, NASA moved from a passive security posture to an active one. The old system was passive. It waited for a problem to be discovered. The new system is active. It constantly monitors, tracks, and verifies, looking for anomalies and preventing problems before they can happen. The stolen moon rock scandal, as damaging as it was to NASA's reputation at the time, ultimately had a positive and lasting impact. It forced the agency to modernize its security infrastructure and to create a system that was truly worthy of the cosmic treasures it was designed to protect. The doors to the moon were now much, much harder to open. What became of Thad Roberts, the brilliant, ambitious young man at the center of this strange story? His life, like the moon rocks he stole, was irrevocably changed by the heist. After serving 7.5 years in a federal prison, he was released. But he did not fade into obscurity. Instead, he has lived a public and in many ways successful life, the one that will forever be linked to his infamous crime. While in prison, Thad did not waste his time. He continued to study, to read, and to think about the big questions of science that had always fascinated him. He was, by all accounts, a model prisoner. Upon his release, he was determined to get his life back on a scientific track. He re-enrolled in university, and against the odds for a convicted felon, he succeeded. He eventually earned his Ph.D. in physics. He focused his studies on the complex and mind-bending field of quantum gravity, a branch of theoretical physics that seeks to unite Einstein's theory of general relativity with the strange rules of quantum mechanics. In 2011, a book about his story was published. It was written by the best-selling author Ben Mesrick, who also wrote the books that were adapted into the movies The Social Network and 21. The book was titled Sex on the Moon, The Amazing Story of the Most Audacious Heist in History. The book brought the story to a wide audience, painting a dramatic, and some say overly sympathetic, portrait of Thad as a romantic anti-establishment hero. Thad himself cooperated with the author, and the book is largely told from his perspective. It cemented his place in popular culture as the moon rock thief. After getting his Ph.D., Dr. Thad Roberts, as he could now be called, became an entrepreneur and a public speaker. He has given talks at conferences and on podcasts, often speaking about his unconventional ideas in physics and cosmology. He presents himself as a maverick thinker, someone who is not afraid to challenge the established scientific consensus. His past, rather than being a source of shame, has become part of his brand. He is the outsider, the rebel scientist. His story has had a lasting cultural impact. It raised important questions about the culture at NASA, particularly the supervision and mentorship of its young interns. It became a case study in aerospace security training programs, a cautionary tale used to teach new employees about insider threats and the importance of following protocol. The phrase "sex on the moon" became a memorable, if bizarre, shorthand for the whole affair. The story forces us to grapple with a complicated legacy. On the one hand, Thad Roberts committed a serious crime. He betrayed the trust placed in him, damaged irreplaceable scientific artifacts, and caused a major scandal for an institution he claimed to love. On the other hand, his story is also one of transformation. He paid his debt to society, rebuilt his life, and has gone on to contribute to the scientific conversation, albeit from the fringes. It's a story that resists easy judgment. It reminds us that people are complex, and that a single terrible decision does not have to be the final word in a person's life story. But it also serves as a permanent reminder that some treasures are too precious to be part of any one person's story, because they belong to all of us. The scandal of the stolen moon rocks opens up a final, fascinating area of contemplation, the legal framework that governs space and the things we find there. Who owns the moon? Who owns a rock from Mars that lands on Earth? These are not just philosophical questions. They are complex legal issues that are becoming more important as humanity's reach extends further into the cosmos. The foundational document for all of this is the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. It was signed during the height of the space race by the United States, the Soviet Union, and many other nations. It is a remarkable and hopeful document. Its most important principle is that outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation. This means that no country can claim sovereignty over the moon. The United States cannot plant a flag and declare the moon to be American territory, any more than Russia could. Space is declared to be the province of all mankind. It's like saying the high seas or Antarctica belong to everyone and to no one. This is the treaty that makes it clear that while the U.S. government can be the custodian of the Apollo moon rocks, it does not own the moon itself. Under U.S. law, the legal status of the Apollo moon rocks is very clear. They are government property. They are national treasures, managed by NASA. It is illegal for any private citizen to buy, sell, or own them without explicit authorization, which is almost never given. This is why Thad Roberts was prosecuted for theft of government property. He had stolen something that belonged, in essence, to the American people. But this is where it gets interesting. The law is different for meteorites. A meteorite is a rock from space that falls to Earth. The laws governing meteorites vary by country, but in the United States, the rule is generally finders, keepers. If a meteorite falls on your private land, you own it. You can keep it, sell it, or donate it to a museum. This has created a thriving legal market for meteorites. Collectors and scientists can legally buy and sell these cosmic rocks. This creates a legal gray area. The Martian meteorite, Alachit 401, which was part of Thad Roberts' stolen loot, was found on the ice in Antarctica. By treaty, Antarctica is a scientific preserve, and any meteorites found there are considered to be for scientific use, not private ownership. But what if a Martian meteorite landed in a farmer's field in Kansas? That farmer would legally own a piece of Mars. They could sell it for a fortune. So, you can legally own a piece of Mars, but you cannot legally own a piece of the moon brought back by Apollo. It's a distinction based on how the rock got here. This legal landscape is about to get even more complicated. In recent years, we have seen the rise of private space companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others. They are developing the capacity to go to the moon and beyond. In 2020, NASA announced a new policy that marks a major shift. The agency announced that it would pay private companies to go to the moon, collect a small amount of lunar regolith, soil, and then sell that regolith to NASA. The amounts of money are small, but the precedent is huge. For the first time, NASA is creating a legal and commercial framework for the buying and selling of resources extracted from the moon. This is a step towards a future of space mining and resource utilization. It challenges the spirit, if not the letter, of the Outer Space Treaty. The treaty says a nation can't own the moon, but can a private company own the resources it mines from the moon? This is the big legal and ethical debate of our time. The story of the stolen moon rocks, which started with a young intern's misguided dream, ends here, at the frontier of space law and the future of our relationship with the cosmos. It's a story that has taken us from the silent, gray plains of the moon to the quiet labs of NASA, to a motel room in Florida, and finally to the halls of international law. It's a story about value, temptation, and the human desire to possess the unobtainable. And as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you can picture those tiny, gray specks of dust, not as objects to be bought or sold, but as what they truly are, silent ambassadors from another world, carrying the secrets of the universe and reminding us of the great and careful responsibility we have as their keepers.